So the sneak peek leaks for Boruto TBV Vortex Chapter 20 have just been released, and this chapter is kinda special, as it marks the 100th chapter of the Boruto series in its totality, when we go with Boruto Part 1, Boruto Next Generation, and Boruto TBV Vortex. If you add them both up together, you would see 80 and 20 equaling the 100th chapter that is about to be released on the 18th. And I hope, since it's the 100th chapter, something special happens in this chapter. We hear something from Ikimoto, or potentially we get a double spread chapter cover like I think we received in the past. I don't know what will happen, but let's discuss what we end up having in this chapter, as we have a panel of Mitsuki and RYU fighting. First of all, the art is lovely. The Iron Sand design, Ikimoto really cooked when it comes to its design. I don't know any other interpretation that I had in the past, but this is the perfect one. I really enjoy what we have here, in my personal opinion. But from what we can see, Mitsuki and RYU are fighting each other. We have a RYU who ends up using his Iron Sand against Mitsuki, and a Mitsuki who uses his Sage Mode attack. What is quite interesting to me, and some people might say that, oh, we can't analyze much from this panel, but I think there's a few things that we can pick out. The first thing that I might have to say is that Mitsuki's attack seems a little faster than Ryu's Iron Sand, because RYU is shown here having to react to Mitsuki's snakes before Mitsuki has to react to his Iron Sand. There could be a debate here that potentially Ryu's Iron Sand is slower than Mitsuki's attack, which would be interesting when it comes to Mitsuki's own personal scaling. I'm not saying that Mitsuki and RYU are necessarily on the same level. I don't think we can extrapolate that from this panel alone. We'll see when the full chapters come out, but Mitsuki has been putting on a strong fight based off all the chapters that we have seen. And to be 100% honest, I have a feeling that Mitsuki could actually end up being one of the major MVPs when it comes to this fight. Obviously, if Sarada ends up awakening her Mangekyo Sharingan or reawakening it in this chapter, then it will change a lot of things. But just off this panel, I already have multiple questions. And the first one lies on everything that happened last chapter. Last chapter, obviously, Ayara was the GOAT, using his sword to end up preventing RYU from using his strongest attack, which is to use the Iron Sand to manipulate everybody around him. However, even though we see in that last chapter, near the end, that Ayara's sword was taken, we still see in this chapter that Mitsuki is still capable of fighting the likes of RYU, which is something that is quite interesting. To me, seeing Mitsuki being the one fighting and not everybody else may tell us that Mitsuki is the only one who may have found a way to negate RYU's ability of the Iron Sand. And my personal theory at the moment, simply from seeing this panel, this is the only data that I have, is that it is related to Sage Mode in some way, shape, or form. And this is due to the fact that before, we did end up seeing everybody in some way, shape, or form, apart from maybe Ayara, who was affected by RYU's Iron Sand. I'm not going to deny that. We saw in chapter 18 that Sarada and Yado were basically puppets to RYU, as RYU was forcing them to fight each other. And then we had a Mitsuki, who in the chapter after that, although we didn't really see or it being confirmed that he was affected, we see in the chapter after that Ayara ends up using his sword ability, the Lotus Stone, to end up freeing Mitsuki from RYU's attack. So although RYU did not use him as a puppet, he was still affected in the sense that he could not move or do anything at the time, which makes it even more interesting knowing that Mitsuki is now able to do that with Ayara, who is not helping him. And the reason I say it has to be Sage Mode related is due to the fact that there is only one difference between the Mitsuki then and the Mitsuki now. The Mitsuki then was in his base form, and he was not using the Sage Mode at all. However, now, and in the last chapter, we see that Mitsuki is using his Sage Mode, and it could be due to that Mitsuki is capable of counteracting RYU's Iron Sand, because that is the only difference between the Mitsuki that was caught and the Mitsuki that is not caught right now. When he was fighting using Sage Mode last chapter, he also wasn't caught by any attack. Even though Ayara could have freed him after, we still didn't see Mitsuki being caught by any of the moves that RYU ended up using. And due to that, it could be likely that it is possible that Mitsuki is not affected by RYU's Iron Sand. There could be some interesting debates as to maybe it is not related to his Sage Mode, or just simply as a Sage Mode ability that makes you immune to every sort of attack. Maybe it's simply due to the fact that lightning is stronger than earth. That's one thing that I have heard a few people say, but my only thing about that is that Ryu's Iron Sand is not really earth style, it is a Kekkei Genkai, so I don't necessarily think it works in the same manner. But we did see in the past that lava style is still weak to water due to the fact that water ends up cooling it down. So there is multiple interpretations that could be gone. There's also one of Mitsuki's Sage Mode, since we've seen in the past that Mitsuki's basic abilities allow him to counteract things like diseases that end up impeding on somebody's body. Maybe Mitsuki's Sage Mode has a perk that basically makes him immune from any sort of foreign agent or foreign matter that tries to take over his body. That also is a pretty interesting interpretation. But if Mitsuki's Sage Mode is the reason why he is not affected by Ryu's Iron Sand, or Mitsuki is simply shown in this chapter not to be affected, I believe that we could get an explanation of Mitsuki's Sage Mode, because we haven't really gotten an explanation of what exactly it does. Most of the time, after a character uses a new ability, we get a description of its perks. We do see that with Uzuhiko, we get a description of Uzuhiko the chapter after it is shown. We have seen Mitsuki's Sage Mode pre-time skip in the manga, didn't really get much of an explanation, but we did see that it gave Mitsuki a strong increase in his power and speed. That's something that we can simply note. However, I do believe that apart from just that and the basic abilities that we see Mitsuki use, like the snake clones and the fact that he can create these snakes like Orochimaru that end up attacking his enemy, I do believe that we should get a description of what exactly Mitsuki's Sage Mode ends up doing. And if he is this MVP that is somehow immune to that ability, I do believe that it could be quite likely that we have an explanation of what exactly that ability does. And seeing that Sarada, maybe seeing that she is a burden in this chapter due to the fact that Mitsuki is the only one going crazy, and maybe Ryu ends up getting close to defeating Mitsuki, we have a Sarada who reawakens her Mangekyou Sharingan, or we see something interesting come into play where she's able to fight and find a way to negate Ryu's Iron Sand ability, because that is the biggest problem for them at the moment. In my opinion, especially with Sarada and Mitsuki, they definitely have the manpower and the strength together to be able to defeat Ryu if it isn't for the Iron Sand. So I hope we do get an explanation of Mitsuki's Sage Mode in this chapter. I think it would be quite important and crucial, and if he is the MVP, I think a lot of people would love to see that when it comes to Mitsuki's character. One thing that we also have to discuss when we're talking about the last chapter is Konohamaru being devoured. Are we going to see a Senju finally take a W in the sense that they accomplished something that they wanted to do, which is, like Jira said, to devour their targets? Not just an Otsutsuki, but a target that comes to them from their instinctual drives, which is Konohamaru for Matsuri. If Konohamaru is to be devoured in this chapter, my biggest question is what new form will they end up turning into? Will they end up turning into a completely different creature, or will Matsuri stay the same but simply have more abilities that she can end up using? And if they turn into a new creature, would it be a fusion of Matsuri and Konohamaru? That would be interesting due to the fact that they are not both of the same gender. I really don't know how it could end up turning into, and how exactly will her personality change? Will her personality change into something else? Will she end up being happy because she's technically one with the person that she likes? There are multiple ways that Ikimoto could go when it comes to Konohamaru potentially being devoured. And you guys definitely let me know what you think in the comment section below. Another point that I would like to add is the fact that we could potentially see Boruto really become distrustful of Kashin Koji if Konohamaru is to be devoured. I'm not saying Kashin Koji is evil per se, but maybe he saw a future where it is better for Konohamaru to be devoured by Matsuri due to the potential changes that Matsuri may have, causing her to go against the Senju. Thus, that future is better due to the fact that it is more likely for the Shinji to be defeated, but Boruto will clearly not go for that interpretation, simply due to the fact that at the end of the day, it is his master, it is his sensei, and Kashin Koji has not necessarily been the most transparent person. We've seen this with Himawari. Kashin Koji most likely knew that Himawari had that power, which would ultimately lead to Jiraiya coming to her instead of actually finding Naruto, which led to the fight that they had where Himawari almost died. Boruto was not informed of that, which is why in that chapter he is surprised when Himawari is told to have these Nine Tails powers. So we've already seen signs that Kashin Koji is not the most transparent person out there, which could ultimately lead to a dissolve in their relationship simply due to the fact that Kashin Koji is not telling Boruto the truth. And we've seen this tension in the recent chapters. But one thing I really want to see is a conclusion to at least one fight. If the fight between RYU, Sarada, Mitsuki, and the guys from the Land of Wind is not over in the next chapter, hopefully it reaches the climax where we really know that everything is going downhill from then. But when it comes to Konohamaru and Matsuri, please let Konohamaru get devoured. I'm just being honest, it would really be cool. It's not just for hating from Konohamaru. It would really be cool to see a Senju end up changing or devouring their target just to see what ends up happening. And I don't want that fight to drag on too long when it comes to the sense of I need at least one conclusion of one fight. Either the one versus RYU or the one versus Matsuri to really be shown in this next chapter, in my personal opinion. And will this potentially cause Boruto to act reckless and then make a move, seeing that Kashin Koji is not necessarily trying to protect the people that he loves, but is simply going towards the best option that is there, leading to the best future, which could ultimately lead to some people dying, but he doesn't care if it leads to the best future. It is an interesting take to explore. But last prediction, and the last thing I really want to say, since I'm probably not going to make a prediction video, as this is basically ending up into my predictions due to the sneak peek being released, but we need to see something about Kawaki. If we don't see anything too crazy in this chapter, at least give us Kawaki getting his limiters removed. Give us some really cool dialogue with Kawaki. We know that Kawaki has some of the best aura moments when it comes to this series in general. We've seen that throughout the Code arc. A lot of people were saying that Kawaki should be the MC, which is pretty crazy for me to hear, but at least since this is the 100th chapter, let's get something about Kawaki getting his limiters removed. Personally, I think that it would be quite interesting to see. But discussing Kawaki getting his limiters removed, if you want to hear that being discussed, you should watch this video right here as I discuss Kawaki getting his limiters removed and what exactly it could entail.